Hello everyone. My last video, I was answering a question from a young man in New York named Jacob Elkin, and he's asked me some other questions, and I think they're excellent questions, so I'm going to answer them like I did the last time. Well, they won't be the exact same answers because it's a bit of a different territory. But I thought, and I got his agreement that, yeah, he'd like them answered so maybe others can benefit from my responses to his questions. And right before he sent me his questions, I had a student at NEC, New England Conservatory, by the name of Kens, who comes up with terrific questions as well. In fact, I have many students who come up with questions, and maybe I should just have a student question forum. And just not for students in this sense. These are people who are thinking a lot and about certain things that maybe experience in the field will help them get some of their answers. But depending on what you're coming from, and even the reasons why you're in music and doing what you're doing, the nature of that answer will be different to different people. So, Kens sent me a question before Jacob, but I thought to make a video of both of them kind of combined would be very good because they're similar. Kens was bringing up the fact of how can one be true to the composer's wishes? How do we really know what the composer wanted? I mean, unless you have some very unusual abilities or a very powerful natural instinct, you might not know what Bach or Beethoven or Mozart wanted. Because 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years from now, maybe that interpretation will have changed. We don't know. But there seems to be this is Beethoven, this is Mozart, this is Bach, this is Shostakovich, this is Webern, this is Babbitt, this is Schuller. I mean, it depends. Now, having been with some composers of the more contemporary era, like Gunther Schuller, he's very specific in what he wants. Very, very specific. Which makes it more difficult. Because for him, and I write music myself, so I know where he's coming from. If you know that what you want, if there was something specifically that you were trying to connect to and trying to express through your music, it might have an emotional specificity that's going to have certain technical demands, feeling demands, all this thing to get into the district of how to actually have that happen. Other composers are more open to what would come through the individual player. Now, I'm not saying Gunther isn't open to that. I'm sure he would be in the right circumstance, and if the player's really connecting to the basic premise of where he's coming from. But some composers are much freer than that, and they want to see what their music does to people, and then have that come through them. So the music goes in, has a process through the performer, comes out, added onto, and could be very different in some ways than the composer even thought it could be, but the composer might like it. Now, do we know, for example, what kind of composer Beethoven would have been in that regard? How specific would he have been? How about Mahler? Boy, he tried to be very specific, to try to convey in the feeling of sentiment, feeling at different levels of human expression. He tried to write down all this stuff in different measures, trying desperately to write all these things down. Now, if those things, for example, Mahler is writing down, in my view, if they're interpreted academically, you'll never get it. Well, this means this. Well, that doesn't mean you're inside of that feeling he was trying to convey. And this is where instinct, and I believe building a relationship with the piece, is so important. Of course, that gets interesting this day and age because there's many different recordings that we could listen to. So I guess if one of those recordings catches you and is a spur to your own connection, relationship building, fostering your own ideas based on what you're processing in that piece, that's going to be very important in how you actually express yourself in that piece. So, what does the composer want? Do we really know? No, we don't. But we might have certain feelings about it that will certainly, depending on where those feelings are coming from, depending on how much we take our first feelings and live with them. You know, you can have lunch with someone that you've never met before, or even have known for a while, but not that deeply. You might have certain ideas about them, and all of a sudden you're with them in another situation. And that situation provokes another side of that person you have never seen, and you could be surprised. I never know that person could react that way. I remember someone saying to me once, "I never knew you were such a goofball. I never knew you were so funny." Someone also could have said to me, "I never knew you were so serious." So sometimes, just like music itself, a dynamic in music is relative to the music. It's the context of something that'll bring about a different shift in character or mood or flavor. The same thing with a person. Different context, you might see a whole other person. So what is interpretation? What is it based on? What is it based in? What I thought of Ruslan and Ludmilla Overture when I was 12, I loved that piece. I think about it now, and because my connection was made when I was 12, in the vibrancy of it, I have the same basic thoughts coming back to me. Unless I took the time to really dig deeper into why he wrote that overture, what that overture is connected to, I'm going to probably be stuck with my 12-year-old interpretation, and maybe some of it was really valid, because it certainly wasn't coming from any place with any preconceptions of how it should be. So unless I really dug into Glinka, where he was at that time in his life, what he was processing, as best as any references I could find, and then put together my own feelings of those references, it's not going to change too much. Little bits here and there. So I think you get my drift of what I'm talking about. So this whole thing about being true to the composer's wishes, it's an interesting territory. Someone can be an authority on Bach. I'd like to think that if someone spent so much time with Bach, that maybe they'd have to build their own powerful spiritual connections in their own way. To feel more where he was coming from. Otherwise, I think some people can get very hooked on all the imaginative things he did. Yes, that was a part of it for him, being able to take fugues and then flip them around and have them still work out flawlessly and harmonically incredible and all this for what he was trying to accomplish. Just incredible, that interconnectedness of how they can change certain things and then they still kind of flow in a working, moving, organic way. It's extraordinary. But should it have vibrato? Should it not have vibrato? What were the exact lengths of the notes? Is there the way to play the Bach cello suites? So this leads me to Jacob's question, doesn't it? And he wrote 3 of them. Let me read them for you. Number 1 is, when you start working on a new solo piece, what is your process for developing your interpretation of how to play it? Well, let's start with that one. So he's obviously asking questions about interpretation, because this is what this is getting down to. Interpret. I like to take, first of all, the word interpret and say, if I'm in a situation, what am I trying to get out of it? Do I know a lot about it beforehand? Am I expecting a certain result? How open am I to the circumstance in the first place? And since the human being is just not heart of emotions, just not an intellect, just not built on past impressions. We have a brain, an instinct, mind, mentality, a habit life. There's so much that any given situation, when it comes in, can resonate with us. Sometimes we don't always feel the deeper things. They might come out at another time. Some things might get lodged in our unconscious mind or a semi-conscious mind. So, when I start working on a new solo piece, I do like to find out if the composer has any thoughts on his piece. I know when I'm writing, my wife and I, Carol and I, go through great lengths to make sure that someone has a very clear idea of what we're writing about. At the same time, as much as I put in what the piece is about, I say, but you're going to have to build a relationship. Because depending on your relationship with something, that's going to change your interpretation. So you need to start slow. Just like in a human relationship. Start slow. Much better than going too fast too soon. And in that, you'll be able to see what the piece says to you. So just like in a good relationship, you have to be a listener. Listen to the piece. You're playing it. Then step back and listen to it. Feel what it's been doing to you. Obviously, you get a piece that has rhythms and intervals and a range and maybe new manuscript. So people are writing a lot of different kinds of things. Even in the microtonal world, there's a lot of different things, and people write different, here's the keys of how to interpret all the different symbolism that has just been written. You have to just get very, very basic at first, if it's something like that. And just look at the floor plan, so to speak. Look at the blueprint. There's this note. You might just play around with, can I even hit that note they're asking for? Well, that's a hard interval. It takes you back into the basic mechanics, doesn't it? So, right away, you're giving yourself time to form feelings. Even though you're having feelings, right away, some of those might be useful, those first impressions. Some of them might not be. Some of them might not be. Now he wrote another question here. This is from Jacob. You talk in some of your videos about associating images or feelings with different timbres and articulations. What role do those play in how you interpret a phrase? If the composer put different kinds of accents, different kinds of dynamics, articulation markings of various kinds, I can look at them and play them very mechanical, let's say, for lack of a better word, Arbenz-like or Bona-like. But according to what I feel the piece is saying, those are going to be different as well. And so if I only have one idea of how a slur goes to another note, da-dee, da-dee, that might not be in the feeling of the piece. So the different articulations, the different timbres, timbre is something that can start to evolve. It might not be clear certain timbre changes just because there's a dynamic change. Even though a dynamic change, I believe, heralds a timbre change. And this is where certain composers like Mahler really tried to write, well, here's this and this. Even Grundl, he wrote a lot in the trombone concerto. He wrote a lot of different feelings that a lot of people I hear do not do. All of a sudden there's a little dolce in the middle of a retard passage. Just didn't put retard with a decrescendo. There's a little dolce marking. He's trying for a nuance change. So the piece is three-dimensional. If it's approached academic, it'll never be three-dimensional. Because it won't be alive. It won't be portraying a life, an essence, a character, a personality, an inflection. So, What role do those play in how you interpret a phrase? Well, once I get, and you know what? I can't totally divide it up like that. His last question is, what do you think about balancing the way we plan to phrase something with the spontaneous needs of a performance situation? Well, now that's an interesting one. What I meant, though, that I can't just say, well, there's a timbre and there's an articulation. How are they going to affect my interpretation? Or what role do they play in my interpretation? They're going to play a role because they're there. But unless I discover what the piece is about for me, and it starts to take on that life, looking at all these different articulations and dynamic changes and what potentially are going to be timbre changes, I'm not going to have any place to put them. It's going to be like just, okay, here's this word and here's this word and here's this punctuation point. Well, not all exclamation points are the same, are they? Not all question marks are the same. Not all periods are the same. So everything starts to play off each other. The articulations, the dynamics, my own feelings that are growing as I'm with the piece day in and day out. Everything starts, if you let it, and you don't try to come to anything too soon, there's a process where things are fermenting, and then they start to come together and maybe form a certain kind of texture, material starts to be born from that. And then you start to see how you're going to weave the cloth of this piece, the landscape of this piece. What's forward, what's in back, what's happening at the moment, what's happening in the future. So we can't be too 1, 2, 3 with it. Well, first I do this, and there is a first thing. First you have to see, wait a minute, can I even read this piece? And take your time with it. So there is the beginnings, getting into it, just being able to familiarize yourself with just what in the world is it on a very basic level of notes. Then, there's a dynamic. That double high F sharp needs to have a trill on it at forte piano crescendoing to triple F. Okay? Then you might have to figure out how to do that. Forget about interpretation right away. Do we even have the capability to play it? So, when we get into this last question, how do we plan, what do you think about balancing the way we plan to phrase something with the spontaneous needs of a performance? Well, you always go in with a plan. That's my feeling. It's just like taking a walk every day. You might go for the same walk every single day. Okay? But it's not going to be the same, is it? It's not going to be the same every day. You're not going to see the exact same things every day. Let's be simple. Let's start with the weather. Let's start with then your mood that day, your energy level that day. You might, if you walk at the same time every day, you might see certain people that are the same, doing what they're doing at that particular time of day, perhaps. But you might see a bird come by that hasn't been there before. You might witness something that you wish you'd never seen that day, or something remarkable. You have an exchange with a person even though you pass them every day, but all of a sudden on one day, there's a hello. So you go in there with your relationship and your plan and have the freeness and the faith in what you've done to expect the unexpected with open arms And there you have one of the mysteries of life. The planned and the unplanned coming together and doing their magic. So Kenz and Jacob, I hope that helped you a little bit with your questions. I look forward to more.